And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings and Now TV. I appreciate you being with me so very, very much. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and we are continuing our study of the challenge of Christ. We are focused on the book of Revelation because everyone, it seems, wants to go to the book of Revelation. Both the futurist and the atheist. Don't you think this is ironic? Both the futurist and the atheist go to Revelation. The atheists and agnostics and unbelievers say, see, Jesus said he was coming shortly, coming quickly, coming soon. His coming was at hand. It didn't happen, therefore Jesus failed his own promise, his own challenge. His own challenge was, if I do not do the works which the Father has given me, do not believe me. Futurists run to the book of Revelation and they bring a boatload of presuppositions along with them. The presuppositions are, yes, the book says these things must shortly come to pass. God said that. But you see, God doesn't see time look like you and I do. Therefore, when God said these things must shortly come to pass, that means a variety of different things. Number one, when it finally gets around to starting to come to pass, it will happen rapidly. It wasn't soon when John wrote. It wasn't coming imminently. But when it finally begins to happen, it will happen rapidly. Well, that's not the meaning of the words. That's an abuse of the Greek language. There's no justification for it. It's only demanded by those who have a presupposition about the nature of the coming of the Lord. Pardon me. So, then they tell us, well, you see, yes, God did say these things must shortly come to pass, but God doesn't see time like you and I do, like humans do. Therefore, shortly to him, in fact, it's so ironic. I was reading some material on Facebook, on the internet, just this very morning. And I had, I just kept shaking my head because I knew what I'd been sharing with you here on Now TV about what the unbelievers say and about what believers also say about God doesn't talk in time like man does. And this individual on the internet was saying that very thing. And they were appealing to the book of Revelation. And they were saying, we have to understand that when God said these things must shortly come to pass, he was talking about shortly in regard to the way God sees things. And God doesn't view time like we do. After all, one day is with the Lord 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. So, like I said, it's somewhat ironic that I've been sharing with you what both atheists and unbelievers, as well as some believers, say. And this very morning, I was reading the comments by a believer who was using that very argument. Well, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, the argument that, first of all, that shortly come to pass means when it finally begins to happen, it will happen rapidly, but it's not at hand. I'm sorry, that's an abuse of the Greek, an absolute abuse of the Greek. When you couple that language, or when you just look at the Greek term, intakai, as I have examined with you, it's more than obvious. Intakai is never ever used to refer to the rapidity of action as opposed to the imminence of the action. Never. So if you're going to claim that that's the way it's used, the burden of proof is on you. It's not on me, because I can prove that in all occurrences outside of Revelation 1:1 and Revelation 22:10, I can prove that entokai is used to speak of things that were going to happen very, very soon. Now, they might happen rapidly when they begin to happen, but the emphasis is on when they would begin or when they would happen. Okay. So, nonetheless, we are told God doesn't talk in time like we do. I introduce for your consideration Luke chapter 21 and verse 8. Now remember, Luke chapter 21 is the answer to the question of the apostles concerning the end. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 3. And Jesus gave them a warning, be not deceived. He gave them signs to know that the end was near. Now I want you to follow along with me very, very carefully, because you absolutely must catch the power of this. I am 100% convinced that if we catch the power and the application of Jesus' words in Luke chapter 21 and verse 8, we will never again use the argument, oh, one day is with the Lord 1,000 years. 1,000 years is as a day. Oh, God doesn't talk in time like we do. God doesn't think in time like we do. No. That argument is completely, totally false and will not stand examination. So, here in his response to the question about the end, Jesus said, take heed lest any man deceive you. Many will come in my name saying, I am he, and the end has drawn near. Now, the word time is kairos. We're going to be examining that word very carefully as we proceed. But for the moment, I just want you to notice, Jesus said, false teachers are going to come and begin to declare prematurely the time has drawn near. Do not believe them. You know, I was examining this argument on one occasion, pointing out what it meant, pointing out that Jesus was warning against making premature declarations of the end. I said, therefore, look at every generation of believers. Believer after believer after believer, false prophet after false prophet after false prophet have said, the end is drawn near. This is it. This is the generation. And this individual said, no, you don't understand. The false prophets Jesus is talking about were going to claim to be him. That's the problem. And I was flabbergasted. I literally was flabbergasted. I said, so in other words, what you're telling me is that as long as a person doesn't claim to be Jesus, that it's okay if they make false prophecies. And that pretty well ended that discussion. How ridiculous can you get? I mean, that doesn't even make good nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. It's utterly ridiculous. So, Jesus said, many will come in my name saying, I am he. The time has drawn near. Do not believe them. Do not go after them. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus was condemning premature declarations that the end had drawn near. I adduced for you some passages in which New Testament writers, in which apostles said the end had drawn near. Now, we're going to get to one specifically today, and that's 1 Peter. So I'm going to give you some time to grab your Bible. I want you to have your Bible. I want you to see this for yourself. Now, while you go there, let's be reminded of James chapter 5. James chapter 5, here is James, follower of Jesus, who knew about the warnings about making premature declarations of the end. What did he say? Well, before we examine that, let's remind us of what Jesus said to those apostles to whom he said, do not make or believe premature declarations of the end. Now remember, the apostles had asked, what should be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus gave them some signs of the end of the age and of his coming. And he said, in the parallel to Luke, he said, learn a parable of the fig tree. When it has put forth its leaves, you know that summer is nigh, even at the door. So likewise you, when you see these things, know that it, that is, coming Lord, the judgment, the resurrection, the kingdom, then know it is nigh, from the Greek word ingus, even at the door. Now here's James, living later in that very generation. James said, let me see here. These are brethren being persecuted for their faith in Jesus. And he says, be patient, therefore, brethren, until the parousia. What did the apostles ask about in Matthew chapter 24, verse 3? The parousia. And in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus told them, you're going to be persecuted. They're going to deliver you up to the Sanhedrins. You're going to be hated of all men for my name's sake. Be thou faithful unto death. And then he gave the signs and told them by seeing the signs, they could know that that parousia, was nigh, even at the door. Now here's James writing to brethren who are being persecuted. And he said, be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming parousia of the Lord. The parousia of the Lord has drawn near. What did Jesus say? When you see these things begin to take place, know that the parousia, has drawn near. That is to say, it's nigh, it's even at the door. James, writing to those being persecuted, writing to those, in other words, who were seeing the signs that Jesus gave of the imminence of his parousia, and he said the parousia has drawn near, and then he said, oh, by the way, the parousia has drawn near. Now, that's from the perfect tense of ingus. The perfect tense of parousia is engiken. It's the same identical tense used by Jesus in Luke 21 and verse 8, when he said the false teachers will say, the end or the time has drawn near, engiken, perfect tense. Don't believe premature declarations that the end has drawn near versus James, living later in the same generation, witnessing and experiencing the very signs that Jesus gave, saying the parousia has drawn near, and he says the judge is standing right at the door. Jesus said, when you see all of these things come to pass, then know that it, the parousia, the judgment, the kingdom, is near, nigh, even at the door. Folks, this is not coincidence of language. This is perfect parallelism. Now let me ask you a question. Was James a false teacher? The gentleman that I mentioned earlier in this program today, who said he used to be a minister in the Churches of Christ, who has written a book entitled Broken Promises, says, yes, James was a false teacher. James gave broken promises. Do you believe that James gave a broken promise? Do you? Now look, Jesus said, no declarations, of the nearness of the end until you see the signs, the very signs that will mean it is near. Here is James, who undeniably knew about that warning of making premature declarations of the nearness of the end, nonetheless said, it has drawn near. Now, either James was mistaken in believing that he saw the signs of the end, or he was just flat out wrong to declare that the end had drawn near. Or James was right, and the end truly was near. Now, I ask you to grab your Bible. I got to tell you, this is absolutely incredible. The very first time I saw this, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to grab my Greek text here. Excuse me. The very first time I saw this, I have to tell you that it was one of those things that I was just stunned. I sat and I looked at that and I said, okay, why have I not seen this argument in any literature? Like I said, I was stunned. Okay, so remember, Luke chapter 21, verse 8. The false teachers would come saying, the time, the kairos, has drawn near, perfect tense. Do not believe them. What is the time? It is the appointed time. It's the end of the age about which the apostles were asking in Matthew chapter 24. Now watch this. Remember, Jesus said, no premature declarations of the nearness of the end. Do not believe that the end is near until you see the signs. When you see the signs of the end of the age, the signs of the parousia of Christ, when you see the signs, know that it is nigh, even at the doors. Peter, who remember, was on the Mount of Olives and heard Jesus' warning about making premature declarations of the end or believing them, writing somewhere around 63, 64 AD, it's generally believed, said this. 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 5, Peter says to the Asian saints, the time past of your life will suffice you to have walked in riotings and banquetings and wantonness and lasciviousness, etc., etc. And he said, wherein they think it's strange. The people that you once ran with, your old drinking buddies, is the way we would put it in modern terminology. They think it's strange that you no longer run with them to the same excess of riot. They speak evil of you now. And yet they shall give an account to the one who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Now, very quick little brief Greek lesson here. The Greek word ready is from the Greek word hitoimos. Alfred's Greek Testament said that the Greek reader would have understood that to refer to the judge who was imminently ready, or ready to judge imminently. Now, keep in mind, that's Alfred's Greek Testament. Alfred's Greek Testament is a highly, highly respected Greek authority. So he says the Greek reader of 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 5 would have understood that Peter was talking about the judgment of the living and the dead being imminent. Watch this. Verse 7 to me is really kind of the kicker. And I'm skipping down for time consideration. It's all a united narrative. The end of all things has drawn near. Be you therefore sober and watch unto prayer. Now that paranesis, that exhortation to watch, is directly from the Olivet Discourse, Matthew chapter 24, 43 and following. Watch therefore. What were they supposed to be watching for? Oh, the signs of the parousia, the signs of the end of the age. Yeah. But notice what Peter said. The end, telos, of all things. Now, let me stop right there. Is the parousia the end of all things in the futurist paradigms? Well, of course it is. The end is generally considered to be the end of the current Christian age, the end of all things. The end is considered to be the end of human history. So let's make no mistake. The word telos in futurist eschatologies is what? The parousia, the end of the age. So, the end of the age is the kairos. It is the day that God had appointed in which he will judge the world according to righteousness by this man whom he has raised from the dead. Acts chapter 17, 30 and 31. See, that's the appointed day. That appointed day is the time of the end. It's the telos. Peter said, the end of all things has drawn near. Well, has drawn near is from English, the perfect tense, meaning in Gekan. It's the word of Luke 21 and verse 8, in which Jesus said, don't believe anyone who says the appointed time, in other words, the appointed time of the end, has drawn near in Gekan. That is, until you see the signs. When you see the signs, you will know it is nigh, even at the door. And there's Peter writing approximately 30 years or so after Jesus' warning, said the end has drawn near. Oh, but that's not all. Now, listen, this is enough. Let me ask you, was Peter a false prophet? Well, heaven forbid. The atheist says yes. The agnostic says yes. Apostates say yes. I've been corresponding back and forth with a fella on Facebook. And he said, well, the kingdom was postponed. It didn't come when it was supposed to. That means that Peter's prediction right here was false. It meant he was false teacher. But I got to hurry. Look at verse 17. Peter says, the time has come for the judgment to begin at the house of God. And if it first begin at us, what shall be the end of those that do not obey the gospel? Do you catch the power of this? Now, another little lesson in the Greek, okay? Peter says, the time, it is ho kairos, or ho kairon, okay? Pardon me. Kairos is the word of Luke 21, verse 8. The false teachers who would prematurely declare the time has drawn near, they say, ho kairos. The time has drawn near. Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 4 says, the time, ho kairon. And he says, the time for the judgment. Now notice, he doesn't simply say, it's time for a judgment. No. He literally says, the appointed time for uses the definite article, the judgment. Now, he uses the definite article, and he uses what is known as an anaphoric article. An anaphoric article is an article that is used when a writer or a speaker has introduced a subject and he didn't use the definite article. But now, to call attention back to the subject that he introduced earlier, he uses the article. And that means that in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 17, Peter was saying, the appointed time for the judgment of the living and the dead has arrived. And my end has arrived. See you next week.